teachers that is centered around the Lord. We have worship. We have a time where Pastor Brandon Hall will be here to speak to us. And so this is just going to be a great, heartwarming, encouraging, inspiring morning. So again, thank you for being here. We do have some elected officials in the room, so I want to introduce Paul Gauthier here in the red. He is Leander ISD Board of Trustees. What place is Paul?
Number 7.
Place 7. All right. Four-year term is about to end, so he is running for school board again. Thank you for your courage, Paul. That's amazing. We also have, again, I mentioned Pastor Brandon Hall. He's on the State Board of Education, District 11. Is that right? EDIFY means to instruct, enlighten, or uplift someone, specifically to improve their mind, character, morals, or spiritual growth. And that Rachel's heart is so beautiful, and she loves the Lord, and her voice is, wow, so amazing. And so she travels the world. Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to be, save as thou art. Thou my good star, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence is my light. I am now going to introduce our speaker. I think my first interaction with Brandon Hall was when I was speaking at the State Board of Education meeting on one of the, many topics. I think it was on the history teaks or something like that. And at the moment, I made my statement. One of the board members, who was not a fan of my comments that were conservative leaning, she kind of went after me, and the Brandon Hall in the back of the room throws out a few very lovely questions that just helped to make my point. And I thought, man, he gets it. I like him. And he assigned our Moms for Liberty parent pledge, pledging to the fundamental rights of parents to direct the education, the moral upbringing, and medical care of their children. We're so thankful for him.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be with you today, and I'm so honored that Chrissy asked me to be here. And it was my pleasure to drive all the way down from Aledo in North Texas. And I'm really thankful for this conference. I really am. And I'm thankful that you're here today, because I think if you're here, it demonstrates that you really care. And I think, I can't remember, one of our first speakers mentioned, apathy. And that's really, we have lots of great Christian people in public education. We have lots of good Christian teachers. But, one of the things we really struggle with often is just the apathy to step up and do something about the problems that we have around us, about the issues that we have in public education. And clearly you're here because you want to make a difference and you want to change lives. And so that means a lot to me that you're here. And like Christy said, my name is Brandon Hall, and I am blessed to be able to serve on the State Board of Education. It's an incredible story I'm going to get into here in just a second. And of course, she mentioned I'm here with my wife, Ashley, and we are expecting our first baby, and so that's something we prayed for. It's something we've been praying for a while, and it makes this whole fight that we have so much more personal to me, as I'm sure it's very personal to all of our parents who are here in the room. And my wife Ashley, she is. If you've been to a State Board of Education meeting, Mary Elizabeth knows this, Christy probably knows this, but you will see my wife there in the room. She's there the whole week normally, and so sometimes we'll go from 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock the next morning, and my wife has always been there to support, so I really appreciate her. And we had, it might have been the same Democrat on the board that Christy was just talking about, but one of our Democrat members, who is not exactly the president of my fan club, she told me one time, we were kind of going back and forth on some things, and she's like, you know what, I will say though, you have a wonderful wife. And I said, yeah, I agree with you. And I was like, my wife is actually my only redeeming quality. And she stood there, and she looked at me for a second, and she said, yeah, I think you're right, she is. So, but yes, we just appreciate being here with y'all today, and we are blessed to serve in full-time ministry. And actually hasn't been updated on my bio yet, but my wife and I are actually stepping into full-time evangelism in a new ministry that we're starting called Revive the Republic, and our purpose is to get the church to bring the gospel back into the public square, because we know that's what it's going to take. We want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We want to be salt and light in the public square, and that's what you're here to do today. It was very interesting, kind of my journey to public education. I'm actually a homeschool graduate, believe it or not, on the State Board of Education. So a lot of people are like, how does that work? And that's something that I wouldn't have expected either. But my interest in public education actually started when I was in Bible college, and I chose to go to Bible college in the Chicago area, which it's a crazy decision, it really is. And but I chose that Bible college on purpose because they had an inner city ministry, and some of the neighborhoods that I worked in Chicago, some of the neighborhoods you hear about on the news, just the crazy violence that they have, the drugs and the gangs. And we also had a private school as part of that ministry. We had a private school for those inner city kids, and so I got to work with those kids these are kids that while they're walking back to their home, because everybody walks in Chicago, and so all the kids walk to school, and as they're walking back home, they're being harassed and recruited by the gangs. That's what they're facing on a daily basis. And obviously, really bad academics in the Chicago public school system, and so these kids are really struggling. And most of them, almost all of them, were from single-parent households. So we're working with the moms, and we're helping recruit the kids for the school, working with the moms to get them enrolled, and then helping them to raise money to be able to keep their kids in these schools. But we saw, when you take them out away from all the drugs and gangs and violence and subpar academics, and you put them in a safe and wholesome and uplifting environment with excellent academics, they took off and they were thriving. And so that's really where the light bulb went off for me, and I was like, education is pretty important. And where kids go to school and how they receive that education is extremely important. And today, some of those kids from what we would call very high risk statistics for going into gangs and all of those things, they're really some of them are adults now, some of them have families of their own, and they are doing great. And that's what I want to see for every Texas public school student. I want to see our Texas public school students also in our private school. I'm so thankful for our private schools. I know we have some of them represented here today. And really, as a homeschool graduate, somebody who's worked with a private school and worked with ministries who have private schools, I'm thankful for them. But I also understand, and this is what really motivated me to run for State Board of Education, that we have 5.5 million students that are still in public schools. Most of them will never leave public school, and they need somebody to fight for them and to stand up for state. And this is not an idea I came up with on my own. I never would have honestly thought of running for the SBOE. I knew what it was. I knew how important it was. You didn't have to convince me of that. But I was just like, at the time I'm 27, so very young, and the person who was on the board at the time, that I kept on having conservative friends like, somebody needs to run against her. You should do it. You have some experience in politics, and you should do it. And I was like, literally the first time, I know you always hear politicians say this and you don't believe them, but the first time I heard this, I was like, no, that's crazy. I'll never do that. I was like, I'm 27. She had been on the board for 22 years. So I was a first grader in Springtown Elementary when she first took the board. And so I was like, there's just no way, and she's been there for so long. And they said, no, there's really an opportunity. You need to pray about it. And so this is something, the first time I heard it, I was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And then my wife and I, we started praying about it. And I was surprised. God was like, yeah, you need to do this. You need to get involved. And we did. We stepped out there, and everybody thought that we were crazy. A lot of people were telling me this isn't going to work out. And then, we step out, and God just opens door after door after door. And I'd been on the board for almost a year before I really started to see why God, opened up those doors. And I believe that God, raises up people into positions of authority. I'm thankful for my constituents that they elected me, but I also know that it doesn't happen without the Lord. And I believe the Lord puts specific people. He puts the right people in the right place at the right time. And that's really what we're going to talk about this morning. Is, of course, if you ask a Baptist preacher to come and speak to you, you're going to get some of the Bible. And so we're going to talk a little bit about a story that you're probably very familiar with, which is the story of Queen Esther. And it's a remarkable story. It's one of the best stories ever. And I'm pleased to announce to you today that our Texas public school students in every school and every district across the state are going to be learning about the story of Esther. I'm going to get up more and how that came about. But this is a story that everybody needs to know. And I'm sure everybody in the room here today is probably pretty familiar with this story. But of course, we have Esther, somebody who was from Jewish captives living in the Persian Empire and living with Mordecai, obviously. And, we have Esther, the king. God starts to, unfold all of these events. You have this pagan king, King Ahasuerus. And, I can't read all 10 chapters of the book of Esther, so I'm just going to kind of give you all the highlights, and then we're going to read one passage of it, a key passage of it, towards the end. But, of course, you have King Ahasuerus, and, the Bible tells us a little bit about this king. We also learn a lot about this king from history, but he was somebody with, a little bit of a temper, and, of course, his wife, Vashti, defied him, and, when he called her out to come and appear before all of his princes and, show everyone her beauty, she declines, and she says, no, I'm not going to do that. And, of course, King Ahasuerus is not much of a feminist, and so he didn't take that very well. And so he says that this is unacceptable. If I let her get away with this, people are going to say that I'm weak. And so he says, we need to find a new queen. And he gets this idea from some of his advisors, and so they set about the process of establishing a beauty contest, of course, to bring in all of the most beautiful women from all across the kingdom, and they bring them all in, and Mordecai, obviously, who is around the king's court, and he's working in the king's court, he hears about this beauty contest, and he says, oh, I have to get Esther to come, his cousin Esther, to come and join this beauty contest. And so, Mordecai's a pretty overlooked part of the story. Like, we tell his part of the story, but I think we forget sometimes that we're told here, of course, Esther's parents, Esther was orphaned, and Mordecai chose to raise Esther. And he must have done a very good job, because Esther turns out to be a remarkable, incredible woman. And this is the part of the story of just how world-changing, just parents can be. Of course, Esther changed the world. She changed the course of history with her bold stand that we're going to talk about here later. But it started with Mordecai, deciding to take her under his wing, deciding to raise her. The Bible tells us that when, the king calls together his beauty contest, that Mordecai would come by during this time of purification, where they're doing their makeup and they're getting all beautified for the king. It says that Mordecai would come by every single day and check on Esther. So he's somebody who cared very much. And I really believe in the power of parents. I believe in the importance of parents and their rights over their children. I think that parents know what's best for their children. And I think parents can change the world just by investing in their children and raising little life changers that can go out and accomplish big things for the Lord. And that was certainly Mordecai. But he hears about this beauty contest. He brings in Esther. Of course, there's this time of purification where they're all getting ready. And when they come before the king, of course, the Bible tells us Esther was more beautiful than anybody else in the entire kingdom. She stood out far above all of these other beautiful women. And the king looked on her, and he loved her, and he chose Esther to be his queen. Now that is an improbable rise to the court of the king. That's an improbable rise to Shushan, the palace. How Esther, she comes in, and her people are captives in this land. She's a Hebrew, she's a Jewish little girl, and then a Jewish woman, and she ends up in the palace of the king as the queen. And we believe, we know that that's God working out those events and placing her in that place for such a time as this, as Esther would later come to realize. And I believe that wherever God has you in your life, God put you there for a reason. You are the right person in the right place at the right time. And Esther certainly was. And then, of course, we get into the story, we learn about a very evil man named Haman. Haman comes in with an evil agenda. This is somebody who's full of himself. He's somebody who had been promoted above all of the princes. He wanted everybody to bow down and worship him. And one man refused to do that, right? And that one man, of course, is Mordecai. Mordecai refused. So, of course, Haman, he hates Mordecai. And, we have people in Texas public education. Can I just be honest with y'all this morning? I think I can with this group. We have people in Texas public education, sometimes in private education, in whatever area that you work in. But obviously you're here because you want to influence education. We have people that come in with evil agendas. And if you're here, it probably their thinking doesn't make sense to you. A lot of times it's easy to kind of dismiss that or say, well, they're doing the wrong thing, but they probably have good intentions. And we sort of dismiss it because we're not wired that way. We don't think that way, right? And we don't understand how somebody could intentionally come in to try to negatively influence children, to try to harm children, to try to groom children. It just doesn't make sense to us. We're like, surely they at least have good intentions. But I'm here to tell you today, we have people trying to influence education with very dark intentions, just like Haman here. And Haman is somebody like what we'll face. The reason that we can't understand it is because we're not just fighting flesh and blood here. We're not just fighting other people here. We're fighting a spiritual battle, right? We're fighting spiritual darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. We're fighting, Satan is at work and he's on the move, and he desires to have the hearts and the minds and the souls of our Texas students. He really does. And just like Haman, he comes in with just wicked intentions. And Haman, he hates Mordecai, of course, because Mordecai wouldn't bow the knee. And I hope we have some Mordecais here in the room today, as well as some Esthers. But Mordecai refused to do it, right? And I admire that courage. I admire that stand that Mordecai takes. But Haman is so angry that he hatches a plan to kill all of the Jews living in the kingdom just because he hated Mordecai so much. And, he builds up this 50-foot gallows to hang Mordecai from. And he convinces the king that this is a good idea. He gets into the ear of the king. And he's influencing him, right? And a lot of times we have that, we see that a lot. If you're trying to influence Texas public education, if you're trying to influence politics, you see these people with evil intentions and they get into the ear of our leaders, of our politicians, right? And it's important that we also influence them. And Mordecai was in the position, Esther was in the position to also have influence, and that's something we should do. And I'm thankful for those of you who have been to the board, spoken to the Board of Education. I'm thankful for those of you who will be in the room when your school boards are meeting, because the other side, those who do come in with the evil intentions, those who do have the bad agendas, they're going to be there. They're going to show up. And we had that problem for a while when I first came to the State Board of Education, where we would have the left, they would show up in force at these SBOE meetings. I mean, we could count on them to be there. The question is, would our people show up? Would our people stand up and say, you know what, we're not going to stand for the things that are happening. We want you, to pass good social studies teaks. We want you to pass a reading list that has good classics on it, that includes passages of the Bible. And you know what we see, unfortunately, politicians are like this by their nature. I'm trying to be a statesman. I'm aspiring to be a statesman and not a politician. But politicians, by their nature, they respond to whoever's putting the most pressure on them. You wonder why we see, we elect people that we think are good people, and a lot of them probably are. We elect good people into the right positions, and then they deviate from what they campaigned on, and they start giving in to the pressure that comes in from people with evil agendas, and we wonder why that happens. And sometimes it's because they are there, the people with evil intentions are there to influence them, and we are not. But of course, Haman, he comes up with this evil scheme. And, as Christians, as people who love the Lord, as people who want to influence public education, we have to be on the lookout for the Hamans, right? And if you live in Round Rock ISD and, you're closer to Austin, you probably see this even more than maybe I do up in North Texas. But, we have this all over the place in our schools. I remember seeing that the first time that I saw that Austin ISD has their own, so-called Pride Week. And it's because, the month of June, which is, we get bombarded by all of this, and in the month of June, and since the month of June falls outside of the school year, Austin ISD says, no, we've got to make sure that we indoctrinate and groom these kids, so we're going to make up our own Pride Week, and we're going to put it in March. And so they have this week-long Pride event where, they're pushing these children towards these alternative lifestyles, away from the Texas values, the biblical values that you and I have, and they're pushing these impressionable, precious young children. That are, these children are innocent, and they're pushing them into this lifestyle and normalizing it and trying to make it acceptable, and they do that for an entire week. And then they come back when school lets back in. They come back in August, and of course, you probably know the city of Austin has their own Pride Festival, and they bust the kids. They say that they do get parental permission for this, but they bust the kids and have them march in the Pride Parade through downtown Austin, right? And these are things we see, even sometimes in very small rural school districts. I don't know if you have any of them represented here in the room today, but that's one of the things that I've been amazed by sometimes, is that even in very small rural school districts, we see a lot of negative things happening. I've seen situations of abuse and cover-up in very small school districts. And how does this happen? Because if you go to a small rural school district, especially up in my neck of the woods in North Texas, I mean, you go to church with, a lot of the teachers in your school. I can think of a school district where there was a horrific situation of abuse and cover up where like 4 or 5 of the school board members are all from one church. One of them's the youth pastor at that church, the other one's the pastor of that church. And yet we see sometimes people don't have the courage to step up and take a stand. There's a little bit of a disconnect. And we see this all over the place in Texas politics, in Texas public education, where we have put the right people in the right position. And that's Esther, right? Esther is, God has put her in exactly the right spot for this moment. And, Haman has hatched this evil plan. Esther finds out about his plan to wipe out her people, and Esther comes to the point of decision. And Esther knows, she knows that there's consequences that could possibly come along with her taking a stand, with her approaching the king and telling him about this. First of all, she's a Jew, right? And the king has already ordered that all of the Jews have to be hung on these gallows. And that's Esther, right? These are her people. And so there's a good chance if the king finds out that these are her people, that she might also get put in that situation. Also, approaching the king when you're not invited at this time in history comes with the death penalty, right? If the king doesn't accept you, the king could have you put to death. Remember, he wasn't real happy with Vashti before Esther. So this is somebody we know had a little bit of a temper, right? And so Esther, of course, she's placed in this situation where she knows there could be consequences if she steps up and does the right thing. And you and I, our leaders find themselves in these positions, and you and I are going to find ourselves in these positions, in our careers, whether you're a teacher, no matter what you do, you're trying to influence Texas public education, you're going to find yourself sometimes in a spot where you're the right person. God has placed you there at that moment for that time. You have the right worldview, but the question is, are you actually going to step up and make a difference? Are you actually going to step up and take a bold stand regardless of what the consequences might be? This is why we have a disconnect in public education in Texas politics, because we put the right people in the right place to do the right thing, but they don't step up and implement their worldview. Our worldview, and you might be here today, you have the right worldview, you believe in God, you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, He's changed your life, you have the Holy Spirit, you walk with God, you go to church, all of those things, and that's incredible. But if we never put that worldview into practice to change lives and to make a difference and to protect students, then to be honest with you, what good is it? Faith without works is what? Dead. Right? That means it's not good enough just to have faith. I mean, that will get you to heaven. Of course, I believe salvation comes through grace, comes by faith through grace, right? That's what I believe. I think you get saved that way. I think that's how you establish your personal relationship with the Lord. But if you're not actually making a difference, in people's lives, if you're not making a difference in the world, then there's a disconnect, and that's what we have. And that's why we have school boards where we go to church with all of the school board members, right? We know them all personally. They're not bad people. And we're like, what is the problem here? Well, there's a disconnect because sometimes people don't have the courage to step up and make a difference because they're worried about what the consequences might be. God puts us into these positions because He wants to use us. And He doesn't have to, right? But that's how God works. He works through us. We are the hands and feet of Jesus. We are, as believers, we're called to be salt and light. He sends us out into the... By the way, I think it's important. I think it's good to have teachers on school boards. I think it's good to have teachers on the State Board of Education. I also think if you're a taxpayer, if you're a parent, you also need to be influencing the process. We need some outside perspectives to come into public education as well, and I think that's a positive thing. So we've had on the SBOE the opportunity this year to do 2 really big consequential things. First of all, that literary works list where we brought the Bible back into Texas public schools for the first time since 1963. There's lots of Hamans trying to influence this process, and of course, they were not happy about this. And I think this is something that, if you would have told me that coming into the State Board of Education, we had the opportunity to bring the Bible back into every Texas public school for the first time since 1963, I don't think I would have believed you. I don't think a lot of people believed that was possible, and God was working all of it out. He put the right people in the right positions to make it happen. When I saw that coming down the pipe, and when I'm in the boardroom and having the opportunity, as somebody who works in full-time ministry, to be able to advocate, for the Bible and explain why it's important and be able to counter, some of the Haman rainbow pastors that come in and advocate against the Bible, and I can, sort of be the counter to that. Then I saw, God put me here for such a time as this. And then we had the opportunity to implement, the first overhaul of our social studies standards in 16 years. These are going to influence, generations of Texas students. The next review, this will be around for at least a generation, and probably, the framework of what we put together this year will be around, hopefully, a lot longer than that, influencing our students. And we're going to start teaching again the Christian foundations of our country, because you can't understand the story of America if you don't understand the faith that drove, the pilgrims, a church congregation across the sea, to take that treacherous journey on the Mayflower and come to Plymouth Rock. And they said themselves in the Mayflower Compact that they did it to advance the Christian faith. We're going to teach that in Texas public schools again. We're going to teach our founding documents. We're going to teach American exceptionalism once again, because our heritage as Americans, and especially as Texans, it's a remarkable story, and it's something we have a duty and responsibility as the adults. We have the duty and responsibility to pass that down to future generations. Sometimes it's going to come with consequences. Esther knew that, and you know what she said? If I perish, I perish. And we need some bold, outspoken Christians who are willing to say, I'm going to stand up to the Haman, whether it's on my school board or in the school, whatever it is. If I have to put my job on the line, I'm going to do what's right. Because God will bring you situations. And you know what? God loves to work in impossible situations. It's his favorite thing to do. Because when you come out of an impossible situation with a victory, you know that only God can have
that message is so timely. In our organization at Moms for Liberty, we even have the shirt that says, such a time as this. We know that right now God has us where he wants us. And whatever your mission is, whatever you're called to do, just know that God is the fuel, your power source, to help you accomplish what that is that he called you to do. Speaking of that, I will say that I've spoken with two people who have attended the EDIFY conference before. I don't know if you're okay with me saying your name. One told me recently that after EDIFY, she volunteered to sponsor a Bible study at the school where she works. Amazing. She was so inspired. That's actually why we're having EDIFY this year. Sometimes we get tired and we're like, can we do this year? Do we have enough energy? And her story was so powerful to us that we thought we've got to do this again. There's another gentleman in the room.
We're thankful, really. We're thankful.
Yeah.
We're thankful because it inspired us and made us go, yes, 100%. But cheers to you for having that inspiration to take on that challenge at school. So
that's right. And there's also a gentleman here who leads a club or sponsors a Club America chapter here at Cedar Ridge High School.
yes.
And it was difficult to get that club started. And we appreciate you. We appreciate anyone who's willing to say, I will take the arrows. I will be that teacher that sponsors that club that other teachers, my colleagues, are going to get their feathers ruffled about. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. So I think Brandon's message today hopefully gave you all the confidence and the encouragement to go back to your schools and do something really incredible.